The sun was setting over Maplewood Estates, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets. John Carter, a former Army Ranger turned devoted father, was enjoying a rare moment of peace in his backyard. His 10-year-old daughter, Mia, was playing just a few feet away, her laughter mingling with the soft rustling of the evening breeze. But peace in this neighborhood was about to shatter. A sharp voice sliced through the calm. Karen Wilson, the notoriously strict HOA president, stormed onto John's property with a scowl that could curdle milk. She pointed a finger at Mia's small hands, accusing her of damaging the perfectly manicured flower bed that bordered their shared fence. John stepped forward calmly, hoping to defuse the situation. Karen, Mia didn't mean any harm. She was just playing. Karen's eyes narrowed. Rules are rules, John. That flower bed is part of the community property, and kids shouldn't be messing with it. It wasn't just about a flower bed. It was about control, power, and something darker lurking beneath Karen's steely gaze. John noticed how neighbors peeked through their curtains, sensing the tension. But what really set his jaw was how Karen spoke to Mia like she was a troublemaker, not a child. John remembered his battlefield training. Stay calm, assess, and never let the enemy see your fear. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was a battle he wasn't willing to lose. He smiled thinly. Let's keep this peaceful, Karen. We can talk to the HOA board tomorrow if there's a real problem. Karen sneered, turning away. But her parting words lingered. This isn't over. That night, John lay awake thinking. Karen's behavior was more than annoying, it was dangerous. And if she was willing to cross a line with his daughter, there was only one way forward. Morning came with a thick silence. John Carter poured his coffee, watching his daughter tie her sneakers by the door. Mia still looked shaken, not quite herself. Her usual bounce was gone. She didn't mention Karen, but John could see the weight she carried after the confrontation. I'm walking you to the bus stop today, John said casually. Mia blinked. I'm okay, Dad, I know. Still, humor me. They walked in. Silence down Sycamore Lane. Karen's home loomed up ahead. Perfectly trimmed hedges, a porch full of gnomes that all somehow looked judgmental. As they passed, the blinds twitched. John kept his eyes forward. At the bus stop, a few other parents and kids were gathered. One mom, Serena, leaned over and whispered, "Heard Karen lost it on your daughter yesterday. Want me to speak to the board?" John offered a tight nod. "Let's give it a minute, but thank you." When John returned home, he opened a storage chest in the garage, not for weapons or gear, but for his military binder. It wasn't filled with maps or tactics, just years of notes on observation, planning, and pressure points. All knowledge he never thought he'd use again until now. Karen had crossed the line, but John wouldn't react emotionally. That's what she expected. He would observe, document, and let the trap close on its own. Later that afternoon, another incident. John had installed a motion sensor camera by the mailbox weeks ago just to keep an eye on raccoons. But now, the footage showed Karen standing near it, snapping photos of his yard, and writing in a leather-bound notebook. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't friendly either. He watched her for several minutes. She lingered, walked back and forth, even stepped briefly onto his lawn. She didn't notice the blinking red light. She didn't realize he was already watching. That evening, John printed out screenshots and stored them in a folder, not for revenge, for defense. Because Karen wasn't just an annoyance anymore. She was preparing something, and John had seen this behavior before, not in a suburban neighborhood, but in distant towns overseas. When someone wanted control, they didn't kick down doors, they poked, tested, slowly escalated, until the other side either cracked or retaliated too hard. So he waited. The next day brought another twist. As Mia returned home from school, she handed John a folded note. Ms. Karen gave this to the bus driver, said it's for you. John opened it. Your daughter continues to disturb the neighborhood's peace. If this persists, I'll be forced to bring her behavior up with the HOA disciplinary committee. No signature, just the HOA letterhead and a petty tone that made John's jaw tighten. He didn't storm over. He didn't call. He walked to his home office, logged the note, scanned it, and filed it with the footage. Then he made a call not to the HOA board yet, but to a close friend. Dave Morrison, retired JAG officer, now a real estate attorney. Dave answered after 2 rings. You sound tense, Dave said immediately. I've got an HOA president harassing my daughter, John said, and I need to know exactly where the legal lines are drawn. Dave didn't ask for details. Start documenting, keep it emotionless. You don't need to win a shouting match. You need a trail. John smiled. Already started. Things weren't boiling yet, but the temperature was rising fast, and John knew exactly when to strike, not in rage, in silence. With proof, because Karen was playing games. But John? He was building a case, and the moment she slipped he'd be ready. It started with a scream. John was in the garage, replacing the battery on his generator, when Mia's voice rang out from the front yard. Not playful, not scared, just sharp and confused. He dropped the wrench and sprinted out the side door. There, she was standing at the edge of their lawn, backpack slung over one shoulder, facing Karen. The older woman's hands were on her hips. Her tone was raised. What do you think you're doing, young lady? Karen barked. John stepped in fast. Is there a reason you're speaking to my daughter without me present? Karen turned, surprised, but not rattled. She crossed onto the community pathway. It runs behind my home, and she was tossing rocks at the fence. Mia's voice trembled. I was just kicking gravel. I didn't break anything. John looked at the trail, barely used and covered in dried leaves. Then, he glanced at Karen's expression. It wasn't frustration. It was control. She thought this was her moment. John calmly reached into his pocket, tapped his phone's record button, and lowered it by his side. Karen, he said, voice measured, you're speaking directly to my daughter with accusations. If there's a problem, speak to me, but don't ever isolate her again. Karen scoffed. Maybe you shouldn't let your child roam freely if you can't control her. That was it. John didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward, but something in his eyes shifted and Karen noticed the confrontation ended with her muttering something under her breath and storming back across the yard. Mia looked up. At her father, did I do something wrong? No, John said, and it won't happen again. That night, John reviewed the footage from the street-facing camera. It hadn't caught the full encounter, but it showed Karen pacing for 10 minutes before Mia arrived home. She had been waiting. This wasn't random. It was premeditated, and that turned everything. John didn't just scan the HOA rules that night. He printed the entire set and went through them page by page, red pen in hand. Just like he used to study terrain maps before a nighttime drop. He wasn't just trying to defend himself anymore. He was learning the system to beat her at her own game. He found something on page 6. No HOA board member may directly engage with minors in matters of compliance or enforcement. Clear, absolute. The next morning, he sent a formal complaint with the footage, the recorded audio, and the rule citation to the HOA board via certified mail. Then he CC'd Dave, his attorney friend. But Karen didn't back down. 3 days later, John found a laminated notice of violation zip-tied to his mailbox post. It claimed unmaintained hedging and inconsistent exterior lighting, which made no sense. His hedges were trimmed weekly. The porch light was solar. John shook his head, peeled it off, and filed it in the folder. The pressure was building. Karen was grasping for any reason to strike back. Later that evening, Serena from down the street knocked on the door. I don't mean to intrude, she said softly, but Karen's been spreading some interesting things around the neighborhood. Like, what? She's telling people your daughter has anger issues, that she's damaging property, that she's been warned by the school. John blinked. None of that was even close to true. She's trying to isolate you, Serena continued, but not everyone's buying it. That night, John sat with Mia in the living room. She was watching cartoons. He looked at her, peaceful and unaware of the storm outside. That's when it became crystal clear. This wasn't about property, or plants, or lights. This was about power. And Karen had made the mistake of trying to use his daughter as a pawn. That time for quiet observation was ending. John had collected enough. The folder was thick, the evidence solid, and the HOA rulebook practically glowing with violations. Karen wanted a war of attrition, but John was preparing for a single, clean strike. John had always believed in discipline over impulse. That mindset saved lives overseas. Now, it would protect his daughter. The time for silence was over, but there would be no shouting match, no banging on Karen's door. He wouldn't feed her hunger for attention. Instead, he would dismantle her system from within. The next morning, John took a quiet walk around the neighborhood, not for exercise, but reconnaissance. He studied fence heights, paint shades, unapproved decorations, even trash bin placement. And more than once, he saw Karen's name taped neatly onto HOA citations on other mailboxes. Always small things, but always conveniently targeting people who'd recently talked to him. He made notes, took discreet photos, and one by one, he started visiting neighbors. Serena welcomed him in. I've seen her put notes in people's mail slots without envelopes, she said. She says she's just reminding them of their responsibilities. But it's gotten weird. 2 houses down, an older couple confessed they had been fined $150 for an excessive garden gnome display after they hosted a birthday party that ran 15 minutes past HOA-approved hours. John thanked them. You're not alone. And this doesn't end unless we work together. Some were hesitant, but most were fed up. For years, they'd shrugged Karen off, too busy to push back. But now she was going after a child. That changed everything. John returned home and spread a growing stack of papers across his dining table. He cataloged each complaint, photo, and policy. Then he made a grid rows of violations, columns of board members. Karen's pattern became crystal clear. Every citation had her fingerprints, even if others signed them. This wasn't leadership. It was a reign. And yet, that wasn't the weapon. Not yet. The real opportunity came days later when John spotted a car parked near Karen's property. Not unusual until he recognized the license plate frame. It belonged to Martin Ellison, one of the newer HOA board members. Quiet, nervous, always seconding Karen's motions, like he was trying not to be noticed. John waited. Sure enough, Martin came out of Karen's house 15 minutes later, looking pale. John didn't approach. He let the moment pass, but he made a note. That evening, he sent a private email to Martin, calm and polite. Hi Martin, I noticed a growing pattern of HOA citations being linked to residents who've expressed disagreement or concern about HOA conduct. I'm hoping to speak to the board about this soon, especially regarding how certain citations violate procedural transparency. I'd like to give you the opportunity to share your experience first. Off the record, no threats, no demands. Just a subtle question. John knew what that did. It planted doubt, a crack in loyalty. Less than an hour later, Martin replied, John, I don't want to be in the middle of anything, but yes, I've felt pressure. Karen drafts most of the citations before we even vote. She says she's keeping things tight. I never signed up for this. Please don't quote me yet, I need time. John leaned back in his chair. The leverage. Now he wasn't just a concerned homeowner, he had insider knowledge, and the pieces were finally moving in his favor. 2 days later, John submitted a formal HOA presentation request. He didn't publicize it. He let Karen remain comfortable, confident, while behind the scenes he coordinated with Serena Martin and 2 other neighbors who had agreed to speak up. Quietly, all at once. Karen, unaware, filed another baseless notice, this time claiming John's backyard shade sale was over the size limit. John smiled. Perfect. He took photos of a nearly identical shade sale in Karen's backyard 2 inches longer. He filed them under Exhibit 3. She thought she still had control. She thought she was tightening the noose, but John was already holding the scissors. Tuesday evening, the community center lights buzzed overhead as John stepped through the double doors, carrying a plain black folder under one arm and a calm expression that concealed the storm inside. The monthly HOA meeting had always been a formality, a rubber stamp parade, led by Karen Wilson and echoed by her carefully cornered board. But tonight wasn't business as usual. Karen sat at the front table, surrounded by the board, tapping her pen like a gavel. She spotted John and offered a brittle smile. Nice of you to join us, she said. I trust you're here to address the complaint I left at your door. He didn't reply. He just sat down, flipped open his folder, and waited. The meeting began as expected. Parking violations, fence paint, color updates, a minor landscaping grant. Then, as if reading from a script she'd rehearsed, Karen adjusted her glasses and announced, We'll now address the matter of Mr. Carter's ongoing non-compliance with several neighborhood policies. The room quieted. John stood slowly. Actually, I requested time to present something first. Karen blinked. You did? Martin Ellison cleared his throat beside her. He did. He submitted the form. It's valid. Karen's expression flickered, brief but visible. John approached the front. His tone wasn't angry. It was controlled, almost surgical. Over the last 4 weeks, I've documented a series of actions that raise serious concerns about how our HOA enforces policy, not just toward me, but several residents. He opened the folder. I have 14 examples of selective citation enforcement, all against homeowners who either questioned leadership decisions or voiced personal complaints. These include Serena Holloway, the Jeffersons, and the Was. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Karen tried to interrupt. We can address individual disputes during I'm not finished, John said, not raising his voice but stopping hers cold. He held up 2 photos, both of backyard shade sales. Here's mine, here's yours. Both exceed the stated HOA size guidelines, yet only one of us received a citation. Another board member leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Then came the audio recording. John tapped his phone and let Karen's voice fill the room, her accusing Mia, calling her behavior disruptive, and warning of disciplinary action. Against a 10-year-old. Gasps echoed from the back row. Serena's hand flew to her mouth. Karen's face drained of color. That recording, John said, violates Section 4.3.2 of the HOA Charter, prohibiting board members from directly engaging with minors on compliance matters. He paused. And I'd argue it crosses far more than a rule. Karen's voice cracked. You ambushed me. John raised a brow. I documented. There's a difference. Martin finally spoke. I can confirm I've felt pressured to approve citations I didn't draft. I was told it was standard, but I no longer believe that's true. The room was silent. Then a voice from the back. I got a citation for my wind chimes last year. Were those her idea too? Another voice joined. She'll find me for leaving my trash bins out while I was in the hospital. People were standing now, talking, looking at each other. Not John. Not even Karen. They were looking around, realizing they'd all been under the same thumb. Karen stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. You don't have the right to turn this into a witch hunt. John remained calm. No, what this is accountability. And based on HOA Section 7.1.4, any board member found in violation of policy and community ethics is subject to a vote of removal. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. I move for that vote now. John, said. The room didn't roar. It didn't cheer. It just moved, residents standing, nodding, shifting behind John like pieces aligning on a board. Karen was still standing, but she looked smaller now. The control she clung to for years was slipping through her fingers like sand. Karen didn't go quietly. The night after the HOA meeting, the vote didn't pass, at least not yet. Several board members, caught off guard and unsure of their liability, tabled the motion for further review. But John knew what that really meant. Fear, hesitation, and behind it all, Karen was already regrouping. The following morning, John's porch light had been unscrewed. His trash can, normally upright and tidy at the curb, was tipped and half emptied. A low smear of eggs painted across the side of his mailbox, childish but deliberate. John didn't flinch. Instead, he wiped the mailbox clean, fixed the light, and took photos. Always photos. But it wasn't the vandalism that rattled him. It was the whisper campaign. At the school, he overheard two parents murmuring near the sign-out desk. I heard he threatened the HOA board, something about military intimidation. I read online that he trained in PIS ops. Maybe he's unstable. The words weren't random. They were planted. That evening, John found a local community forum, had a fresh post. Should we be concerned about a homeowner who uses his military background to manipulate neighborhood politics? No name, no proof, but the timing was no coincidence. John sat at his desk, staring at the screen. Mia was on the couch behind him, curled up with a blanket and a book. He couldn't let this spiral toward her again. He clicked off the monitor and picked up the phone. Dave, he said. I need to know what it takes to file a formal harassment suit. His friend on the other end sighed. You've got enough documentation, but are you ready for her to escalate? John looked toward the living room. She already has. 2 days later, the situation cracked wide open. It was Saturday morning when Serena knocked on his door, again this time frantic. She went after my kid, she said. Told him he wasn't allowed to skateboard on her own driveway. I got it on my Ring camera. John's jaw clenched. That was it. Karen wasn't targeting just his family anymore. She was on a spree. Serena handed him a flash drive. Take it. Use it. I'm done being polite. John didn't waste a second. That night, he sent a follow-up presentation to the board with Serena's footage, a timeline of events, and the full audio from the original incident with Mia. But this time, he added something else. A strategy shift. He included anonymous testimonies, written statements from 6 neighbors, all detailing separate events over the past 3 years. Most had never spoken out because of fear. But now, with momentum building, they were ready. John knew he couldn't win this by facts alone. Karen operated on control, intimidation. The board had seen her tactics, but they hadn't felt her pressure like the neighbors had. Now they had. The next HOA meeting was moved to the local library. Unexpected to many people had RSVP'd for the usual room. Word had spread, and the community wanted answers. Karen arrived late, face rigid, hair sharper than usual. She brought her own stack of papers, determined to defend herself. But John didn't need to speak first. Serena did. Then came Martin, then a retired teacher who hadn't spoken at any HOA meeting in 4 years. One by one, they stood calm, poised, telling the same story in different voices, and when John finally took the front, he didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a printed HOA policy on the table and read one line. The HOA exists to protect the interests of the community, not the pride of the few. Karen stood up. This is a setup. You people are turning on me because I enforced the rules. Someone near the back replied evenly. You made the rules up as you went along. The vote happened on the spot this time. It passed. Karen was formally removed as president of the HOA, effective immediately. But the victory wasn't complete. That night, John found a letter taped to his door, handwritten, no name. You may have won the vote, but you made an enemy who doesn't follow rules anymore. The morning after Karen's removal, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't relief. Not yet. More like a breath held halfway. John watched from his porch as neighbors walked dogs and waved cautiously, as if the air still held static. Even Serena, normally upbeat, seemed hesitant to celebrate. I haven't seen her car, she said, glancing toward Karen's house. It's like she disappeared. And she had. Karen's blinds were shut. Her front porch was bare. The only movement came from the HOA box outside her door, still overstuffed with unopened notices, most from neighbors now formally requesting policy revisions. John wasn't celebrating either. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. Mia had returned to herself over the past few days, laughing again, drawing on the back porch, even inviting Serena's son over for a game of tag. That joy grounded John. But beneath it, he was watching, waiting. The first real sign hit. A letter from the county showed up in his mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. It was an official notice. Zoning violation. Unauthorized structure built in common setback zone. Penalty pending. Demolition. Order consideration. John frowned. He scanned the paper twice. The violation referenced his back porch shade sail, the same one he'd already proven matched. Karen's dimensions, but this wasn't from her. This was filed with the county. He made a call. Yes, sir, the clerk said over the phone. The complaint came in 3 weeks ago, filed anonymously, but the envelope had a return address from your HOA. John closed his eyes. Thank you. 3 weeks ago. That was before the public meetings. Before the confrontation. Karen had filed a preemptive strike knowing she might lose power, so she went bigger. She skipped the board and aimed straight for the county. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was revenge. And she wasn't even showing her face to do it. John contacted Dave, who advised a temporary injunction to halt the penalty, but there was more. The complaint included aerial photos, drone shots, not from public sources. Someone had flown a drone over John's backyard. And recently, he scanned the sky that night. Nothing, but the feeling wouldn't shake. Someone was still watching. The next day brought a harder blow. Mia's school counselor called. "Hi, Mr. Carter. I wanted to check in. We received a concerning email from someone claiming to be a neighbor. It accuses you of yelling at children and exhibiting unpredictable behavior." John's heart dropped. "They sent it to the district. Anonymously?" The counselor continued. "I didn't want to escalate, but I thought you should know." He hung up slowly. This was no longer about property lines or flower beds. This was about character assassination. Karen couldn't win the public battle, so she shifted into shadows. Quiet attacks. Slow poison. He sat on the porch that night, hands folded tight. His instincts told him she was planning something bigger. She hadn't just disappeared. She was coiling, preparing to strike from a place where the rules no longer applied. Then came the final push. Around midnight, a vehicle crept past his house. Headlights off. It stopped for no more than 5 seconds outside, long enough for something to be tossed onto the lawn. John stepped outside with a flashlight. It was a padded envelope. Inside, a single photograph. His daughter, taken from the side. Yarji was drawing with chalk on the patio just 2 days ago. No note, no threat, just a message. "You're not untouchable." John stood frozen. That wasn't HOA warfare. That was personal. Targeted, and whoever was behind it, Karen. Someone she pulled in, or something worse. They wanted him rattled. They wanted him to make a mistake. But John Carter didn't make mistakes when it mattered. He took the envelope inside, secured the photo, and pulled up his contacts. There was one more person he hadn't called yet. His former squad leader. Now working private security stateside, John didn't sleep that night. Not after seeing that photo of Mia. Not after hearing the car idle in front of his house with its lights off. He sat at the kitchen table in darkness, flipping through a notebook from years ago, a field log from his last deployment. Notes on pressure points, counter-intel defensive setups. This wasn't nostalgia. This was preparation. At sunrise, he called Kyle Beck, former squad leader turned private security consultant. Within hours, Kyle arrived in a black SUV with 2 cases and a no-nonsense attitude. "She's crossed a threshold," Kyle said, walking the perimeter. "This isn't HOA drama. This is harassment, maybe even stalking. We treat it that way." John nodded. "We do it clean, legal, but we shut it down for good." Kyle installed 2 additional cameras, infrared ready and motion untriggered. He set up perimeter alerts and helped John contact a private investigator to track the drone operator. By noon, they had a trace. The drone had been purchased using a card under a different name, but the delivery address was Karen Wilson's. It was the break they needed. By that evening, the private investigator had tied the drone back to an online account used to file the county zoning complaint. Same IP address. Karen had been running her revenge campaign from behind a mask, but she left fingerprints. John gathered every document. The zoning file, the anonymous school complaint, the HOA abuse records, and now drone surveillance. He filed an official harassment and stalking complaint with the sheriff's department. This wasn't about catching her in the act anymore. It was about building the net tight enough she couldn't wiggle out. 2 days passed. Then came the knock. Not at John's door, but at Karen's. Neighbors watched from windows as 2 plainclothes deputies stepped onto her porch. Karen opened the door and, for the first time in weeks, was visible again. She looked pale, disheveled, confused at first, and then furious. The officers handed her a temporary restraining order filed on behalf of John and Mia. "You're no longer permitted to contact, surveil, or interfere with the Carter household," one of the officers said. "You've been named in an ongoing harassment investigation." Karen's voice cracked as she protested. "This is retaliation. I've been protecting the neighborhood." But nobody was nodding with her this time. In fact, a small group had gathered on the sidewalk across the street. Serena, the Jeffersons, even Martin. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Karen stepped back inside, closed the door quietly, and drew the blinds for good. That night, for the first time in weeks, Mia played outside again without John looking over his shoulder every 10 seconds. She chalked a rainbow onto the sidewalk, drew a funny squirrel, and waved to Serena's son when he passed on his bike. John stood at the fence, watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the rooftops. Peace wasn't loud, it was quiet, and earned. Kyle clapped him on the back. "You did it, smart. No shouting, no chaos. You boxed her in with her own actions." John nodded. "That's how you fight someone like Karen, not with rage, with reason." A week later, the HOA board held a special election. Karen's seat remained vacant. John didn't run. He had no desire to lead, just to live in peace. But he did make one suggestion before stepping back, a new rule preventing board members from filing anonymous third-party complaints without disclosure or vote approval. It passed unanimously. On a quiet Friday afternoon, John received a letter in the mail. This one wasn't threatening. It was from the county after review of submitted documentation. The zoning violation notice has been formally dismissed. No further action required. He folded it and smiled. As for Karen, she sold her house within 3 weeks. Quietly, no goodbye notes, no explanations. One U-Haul, one moving crew, and gone. Whatever grip she once held on the neighborhood had been broken by the very rules she tried to twist. John Carter didn't go looking for a fight, but when someone came for his child, he didn't react like a victim. He responded like a soldier, with patience, with strategy, and with a strength that didn't need to shout. And now the neighborhood finally felt like home again. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who went too far, this story's for you. And if you enjoyed John's journey, stay tuned, because in some neighborhoods, peace doesn't last forever.